Chapter 2. Some groups today called indigenous people are still connected to the past. Modern man is completely cut off from it, and more importantly, cut off from the transcendental knowledge about his true nature. If the people of the past ever knew how to answer life's most important questions, how was that information lost? Has modern man chosen to live his life in a spiritual fog, or has something nefarious been at work to cut him off, segregating an aspect of himself? Because life's greatest mysteries elude us in the technological age, it means this incredibly important spiritual knowledge has either been lost or hidden from us. It's either been lost or hidden. That's right. It seems that something here doesn't want us to know the truth about our existence. If our ancestors had many answers to these big questions, could such amazing knowledge simply get lost? Does an aging parent gather the children around her deathbed and say with her last breath, "I taught y'all how to tie your shoes, but I forgot to tell you something even more important, who you really are"? Of course, past generations didn't just forget to pass the information along, thereby losing it accidentally. It was obviously hidden from us somehow by something here that acts as our adversary. It was a long process to hide it, and yes, it was done on purpose. I know how conspiratorial that sounds. So what? If I'm right, it's the very definition of conspiracy. At some point in the past, your ancestors bought into the lies that this thing lays down regarding and through its trick, and that forever changed the game here. We have to break the cycle and rediscover the truth about this world and who we really are. Is there anyone listening that wants to speak to me now? Because I can hear you. I can hear you talking. Sure, Matt. Clearly the modern dummy doesn't have these answers. But the primitives of the past probably didn't know either. Why do you assume that the generations of the past had so much more of this knowledge? Those bastards had a tough time starting a fire if the wood was wet. They lived in teepees and igloos and they fought with themselves. Just look at how they dressed. Maybe those bastards didn't know shit. Well, I don't know if they knew everything. I'm not saying they knew everything. But I'm confident they knew much more about the nature of reality than the invasion of the body-snatch stand-ins walking our streets today. Is it really that much of a stretch to say that the people around us are the height and pinnacle of devolution of spiritual knowledge? Remember the last chapter and the guy with the egg sandwich? How about your Aunt Ginny? His answers, the guy with the egg, to the big questions in life were so lame. How could the foresight of ancient man in spiritual areas have been worse than the modern man? You see, how lost modern society is in 2023 gives the sinister nature of what happened to us away. The fact that the man or woman on the street is getting dumber year after year reveals something nefarious is at work. My buddy Greg told me that a percentage of young people don't even know what country is below the United States on a map. Generation after generation is inferior to the one before, and people think that's normal. No, it means our adversary is very skilled in what it does. When I talk about, quote, ancient man having a better spiritual understanding than modern man, that certainly is a broad term. What is ancient man? The people who want to fight with me will picture a group like the Aztecs, throwing a virgin off a cliff in a blood sacrifice. Oh, that's real spiritually advanced, Matt. Ripping a heart out of somebody and throw him off a cliff, just like Thulsa Doom says to that woman, "Come to me, come, my child." That's real advanced, Matt. I mean, you can certainly latch onto the offenses of any one, quote, ancient group to prove me wrong if you're desperate to do that. My use of this term is vague on purpose. Maybe, quote, ancient man here is the Mayans, or maybe it's the Atlanteans, if that's a real thing, or Lemurians, who knows? It doesn't matter. It's a vague term. My point is simple. Even the tribes depicted in Apocalypto, the movie, who carved out hearts, surely had better connections to what is considered the spiritual world than modern man does. Any group of the past would fare better in a spiritual test than our society would today. Our adversary now has access to tools like the internet that are millions of times more powerful than what existed in the past. A major premise of this book is our spiritual demise is intentional. Sure, it sounds like Satan to a Christian, but this thing here works differently, in my opinion, than the depiction of Satan in the Bible. If you don't mind, let me use an absurd track and field example to highlight the spiritual degradation of modern man. What if the world record holder for the quarter mile, was set by a Jabba the Hutt type man lumbering around the track for 120 minutes? Yeah, 2 hours for one loop around. Is anyone going to have the gall to tell me that the ancient runner could have been even slower than this slob, and that it's presumptuous of me to say for sure because I never timed the runners of the past? You look out at the track now, the same Jabba the Hutt man's out there, but now he's 20 feet away from the finish line. But now he's crawling towards the finish line, leaving a disgusting trail of sweat on the ground behind him. And I remind you, who we're looking out on the track now is the world record holder. That's modern man spiritually. Imagine how the people who are out of shape in his society would run if he's the world record holder. No past era of man could produce worse runners. We don't need a time machine to confirm that. The pathetic performance on the track, what we're witnessing now, which is the metaphor for modern man and his spiritual sense of self, is all we need to see. Following this strange logic, no past era of humanity could rival the spiritual bankruptcy of today's idiot. True intelligence and wisdom is gone. Just watch a few minutes of TikTok if you don't believe me. Folks, our spiritual knowledge about ourselves was hidden from us on purpose. It was not lost by accident. We see how hard this entire system works every day, so we know nothing of value. We learn to identify and paint a picture of ourselves using its perverted menu of characteristics and attributes like they, them. In 2023, you are your job. You are your house. You are who you voted for and what pronouns you identify with. It says to you, there's nothing more to you than these spiritually devoid trinkets. The incorporeal or non-corporeal, non-physical side of us is rarely mentioned in culture, other than in the trivial, like the movie Ghost and that wretched Whoopi Goldberg playing Oda Mae. Regarding indigenous peoples, what do you think all those rituals were for? Just for fun? Just like dancing around a fire for no particular reason? Why do a few groups even today still carry ancient traditions forward century after century? This thing here that works against us is working really hard to snuff out any spiritual connections that still exist in any little group. Are we to assume that our ancestors didn't have any spiritual answers and just like the modern man with the egg sandwich, didn't go any further in their spiritual journey than trying to pick the correct church or pick the correct mosque or temple or synagogue? Picking the right religion is not a spiritual understanding of oneself. In many cases, it's just the opposite and part of the trick. Do you really believe that the man that we spoke with on the street with the Egg McMuffin, he is the culmination of 5,000 years of deep thinking? Doesn't it appear obvious, based on how clueless modern man is, that the very opposite is true? That in some way the man on the street has been dumbed down and fogged over? A governor has been placed on any sort of common sense or rationality that still may exist, and it's intentional? All he knows is sports, weather, and the Kama Sutra, whatever that is. He knows not why he wears a tie and never noticed it's a big arrow pointing down at his penis, and that the Windsor knot around his neck resembles a noose that he has to wear to work. Is the modern cubicle worker on the job or Job on the job? He was tortured in the Bible, just like you're tortured in your cubicle every day doing TPS reports. Life's biggest mysteries were intentionally hidden from us. I know how conspiratorial that sounds. It should. It's the biggest conspiracy of all time. If you now want to tell me that many of us in modern society do have these answers, I'd beg to differ. A devout, highly educated evangelical Christian may have a few good responses when presented with the types of questions that I pose to the man on the street with the egg sandwich, but most will be quickly stumped, no matter how educated they are, when you get down to the root of the hardest questions in life. So they'll begin by telling me, I'm here to serve the Lord. Okay, fine, I expected that answer. But what does that mean, you're here to serve the Lord? How exactly are you serving him, other than through worship and going to church? What does your worship do for your God, and why does he even need to be worshipped? Why does an all-powerful God need to be served at all? Do you know why you were put here on earth, to serve your God? Why can't your God perform whatever you do down here himself? How does, quote, praise and worship satisfy your God? Why would something without an ego need to be praised and worshipped? What does your God get out of how well you do down here serving him? If you get an A grade in life and that earns you a trip to heaven, what does your God get out of you doing such a good job for? What does he get out of it? Is it as simple as like a mother's pride when the kid brings home a great A grade from elementary school and a report card? Okay, I realize there are a lot of Christians here and other religions. If you can answer these exact questions, would you say that's rare or highly unique? Of course it's unique. I'm saying that even one in this society that says, oh, I am religious, 99 point whatever percent wouldn't have the first clue in diving into the types of questions and answers that I just listed out. If you could, fine. We're kind of a unique group here. I'm saying even in this society, those that say they're religious, that they're devoid of having any real answers in most people. I doubt I could get good answers and have a whole lot more questions along these lines, but that's not the purpose of this book. I doubt I could get good answers from the supposed leader from each segment of that sect or religion, whether it be the Dalai Lama or the Pope for Catholicism. I doubt they could answer these questions to my satisfaction. And they're supposed to be the leaders of their churches, groups, sects, etc. By the way, the Dalai Lama lost all credibility with me many years ago when he was running around Hollywood giving personal lessons to Richard Gere. He became like a Hollywood sellout. I'm sure he said all the right things about put the mask on and all that BS. What Bill Murray got from him, the Dalai Lama, after caddying around in the Himalayas, remember Carl caddied for him in the Himalaya mountains. He got what would you consider to be a reincarnation truth drop. Total consciousness upon his deathbed. That's a reincarnation, recycle back truth drop. And per the other one mentioned, the popes lost all credibility in about the 4th century. It's likely many ancient civilizations had a vast spiritual perspective and could, in fact, discuss these topics that were just listed out in the questions asked. Regarding the general premise here, most people on the street will strongly reject what I propose. They don't see that anything's hidden. They'll say, Matt, what could possibly have been hidden from me? What's still out there to know that I didn't learn in church or school? It sounds like a dumb conspiracy to me. You're not one of those people, are you? It's not a matter of what is still yet to be understood. That implies modern man is actually making some sort of slow progress and generally going in the right direction. No, it's just the opposite. Modern man's spiritual soul train has intentionally been sent backwards on the other track. What most people think they know about themselves and about existence is a crafted deception that starts with science on one bookend and is sandwiched by someone like a pope on the other bookend. There's something in this world that is actively trying to hide spiritual truth from every real person who's left. As bad as that situation sounds, it can benefit those who overcome it and transmute the trick. That's actually its job, the asshole dark here. Its job is to hide you from yourself. It's playing the role of asshole it was designed to play. Most fairy tales need a bad guy for the story to work and to deliver the happy ending when the bad guy is eventually foiled in the end. Many ancient societies that are long gone likely knew many of the spiritual truths that you and I are now just rediscovering. Maybe they saw the illusion a long time ago and said, "Get me the fuck out of here." Is that why the ruins of ancient civilizations exist all over the world? Yet at each site there's no good information about who built the structures and why they were even built? The rule seems simple and it repeats. The older the civilization, the more they probably knew about the human spirit and soul. Matt, even if these people were savages and they carved people's beating hearts out of their chest in some sort of ritual, yeah, even if that was the case. But that act itself and on its own doesn't preclude them from having a far superior understanding than the modern idiot. Why do you think they were so interested in the live heart anyway, if that's the case with some cultures? Which we would say about the live heart, we would say it's a body part far more important than the brain in making a spiritual connection of some kind, or a bridge out of here. In today's world, the sooner the generation was handed the phone and the sooner the generation was put on the internet, the more they only understand absurdities like TikTok. Stop to consider this. Why is there so much mystery in this world? Why is there so much mystery in this world? Heck, the History Channel on TV in the United States is like 90% now about aliens, bizarre artifacts, long-forgotten cultures. There's no more history on the History Channel. Why, quote, ancient aliens dominates a channel called the History Channel could be a truth drop in and of itself. How can this modern age still have thousands of unanswered mysteries? Guess what? If this world is as real as the university professors say it is, then it can't contain all this mystery. It's reality giving itself away. You'll find that to be a repeating theme in this book. Could this be another as above, so below presentation or phenomenon? Do the amount of mysteries in this world increase as mankind loses his spiritual self? As he becomes a bigger mystery to himself, maybe the world reflects this in other ways and presents more mysteries for the History Channel to latch onto. Unanswered questions about things like Easter Island are just a tiny fragment of what science can explain. How can so many things be still unknown in the modern age? And the list of mysteries just grows larger and larger decade after decade. There's so many, it almost seems like the History Channel is making shit up. Literally, I don't watch it. But whenever I come across it, here's William Shatner talking about this ancient device we don't know what it was used. There's just one thing after another, saying this didn't exist when I was a kid. If I call reality a conspiracy generation machine or a reality generation machine, is it a mystery generation machine or the mystery machine? There's more shit. This shit did not exist when I was a kid. Just keep that in mind as a possibility. How can there be so many conspiratorial paths to research in this life? Yes, if you don't believe what the experts at the Smithsonian say about what the Sphinx represents to ancient Egypt, then your insightful contribution is labeled conspiracy and thrown in the trash can next to a used condom. The mystery of the ancient civilization of Atlantis is a story that never goes away. It's even depicted in the modern Aquaman movie. How can there be thousands of well-documented UFO sightings and abduction stories? Thousands and thousands. Is every one of these people and all 1,000 alien researchers and the people that write books, are they all insane or they're all in on it? Well, if they're not all insane and not in on it, then it's a reflection of reality itself. The experienced researcher sees that when things surpass certain thresholds, it's pointless to examine the specific details anymore, and instead reality itself must be studied. Is reality itself the engine that drives the endless mystery of this place? That's likely to me at this point. Let's look at a few trivial details among 10,000 things we could be looking at. Again, this book is not about conspiracy, or as the other one, it would grow towards 1,000 pages. But let's just look at the most basic of all mysteries. As a kid at my age, over 50, Bigfoot. Oh, Bigfoot was in books and magazines. Bigfoot. Why is that so popular? How did some story about some hairy giant become world famous based on like a 7-second blurry video? Maybe some guy put on a suit. And based on just that doesn't make sense. There are now 1,000 TV programs about hunting ghosts, but the topic is generally dismissed by the masses, even though many of us have personal accounts and experiences with something you could call a ghost. Even people that don't believe in anything, like my mother, have stories about a relative being there in front of the bed, and when they looked over, we all have that. But it's just, in the mainstream, it's all dismissed. Of course, the list of strange anomalies in this world could go on for thousands and thousands of pages. These topics attract the interest and attention of millions of people, but in the end, all are basically dismissed as folly. I think the opposite is true. A world that produces an endless amount of mystery reveals something about the nature of reality itself. The sheer amount of conspiracy and things to investigate in this world is not possible if the world is a natural world that came together the way Carl Sagan says. To me, it appears the list has grown artificially. I'm over 50 years old. Again, I assure you back in the day, we had Bigfoot, we had Loch Ness Monster, we had the Bumble from Rudolph, we called the Abominable Snowman, and that's about all we had. I'm sure there were some things I was missing, but there wasn't a whole lot. 5 years later, when I got to high school, then I found out about this thing called the Jersey Devil that roams around the pine barrens, and that was interesting, but that's all we had. Today, there are like thousands of these topics. If you expand the definition of artifacts and ancient sites, tens of thousands of things. To me, they didn't exist. To me, it is like living in a giant Mandela effect. Reality is producing this in some way. And as we'll talk about a little later, reality just isn't this thing completely isolated on its own. Reality is a reflection of real people. So as real people lose themselves and don't understand themselves, and as I said earlier, become a mystery to themselves, perhaps this mystery in terms of all the stuff that William Shatner talks about on Ancient Aliens and all the other horseshit programs, the mystery is reflected potentially back on the screen. Just keep that in mind. There's a whole lot more to talk about as we move forward in detail in these topics. Your textbook in school will talk about ancient Egypt as the first culture that established what we know of as modern civilization. But what about all the shit that they've now discovered 10,000 years before that? What the heck was Göbekli Tepe then, a fast food drive-thru for men on camels? Sure, you remember a few chapters of your 9th grade history book talking about Samaria, Babylonia, Mesopotamia, the cradles of civilization. But according to what you remember from school, those dummies could barely stitch together a loincloth. Didn't one of those delinquent cultures invent the wheel or something? Following the history we've been given and then backing up in time from the ancient cities of the Middle East, we're led right into this void. We're led into what's called Darwin's comic book. What happened before ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia? Nobody knows. That's when Darwin takes over, where you're told your ancestor was some sort of monkey man. After a few million years, your vine-swinging great-grandfather somehow evolved into a caveman, then eventually married a woman that looked like the opening scenes of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Your great-grandmother was brandishing bones to the other tribe. Your great-grandfather was swinging on a vine like Tarzan, moved into a cave, married one of them, and then sooner or later, you came. Come on, man. Come on, sir. Does that make any sense? Okay, yeah, if Darwin's right, then for some reason, when we needed it most, the proto-gorilla human lost 95% of its hair. Weren't we what 2001: A Space Odyssey depicted us as? But then as we needed it the most, we lost all our hair. A silverback gorilla could sleep on a glacier tonight and be very comfortable. But go figure. Eskimos are mostly hairless. Hey, Darwin, you freak. What happened to your natural selection? Where's your natural selection now? Your dumb theories demand that only the hairiest of Eskimos would be able to survive and reproduce. If you were correct, people living north of the Yukon Territory in Canada should look like Ewoks today. If Darwin's BS is correct, why didn't the, quote, human being evolve by adapting our skin so we no longer get a sunburn? How come a rattlesnake can lay out in the sun all day long in Arizona, but our fragile, broke human asses can't be outside from noon until 3 without absolutely frying? Please don't say pigment and try to tell me about black people. We all can get bad sunburn, okay? So let me get this straight. After millions of years of evolution, the most basic thing we should have adapted to, the sun, humans did not adapt to. If that's the case, we humans are like the fish who can't swim that ended up on the island of misfit toys. We humans should be there too, right now it seems, alongside the polka dot elephant. People sunburning in 2 hours destroys Darwin by itself. You don't need anything else. These examples could go on and on. Like I said earlier, why did the human who was once a monkey keep making evolutionary progress, but the monkey, who is still a monkey today, had his progress totally stopped? Per evolution, a monkey shouldn't even exist today as we know it. That line of evolution, right, Darwin, should have come maybe halfway to ours. This proves how comical Darwin is. No other species evolved with any intelligence at all, but the human came all the way up from a bacteria to an iPhone, while every other animal continued to smell its own ass. Yes, Darwin is obviously BS. This is where the palace guard, a defender of reality like your best friend, demands that I now explain then where the humans actually came from, if I know for sure that evolution is bunk. They'll say, if you're so smart, Matt, you tell me then where humans came from, smart guy. Because I can't do that, I'm not able to pass along information that only the creator of this plane of existence would know. Then the palace guard will use my resignation in this regard to prove to themselves that I'm wrong about Darwin. This is one of their favorite techniques in laying down their fallacious reasoning. It's kind of like the trick question posed to Miss Vito in My Cousin Vinny. Remember the prosecuting attorney was like, you don't know. It's a trick question. You don't know, do you? That's what they do to us. The defenders of reality, the palace guard, latch onto the one little part of the story you don't know. And to them, you don't know that one little part that destroys your entire argument. They will employ this every time you speak of anything that they label to be conspiracy or say something is wrong with a news story or with history. Okay, smart guy, if no one landed on the moon, you tell me exactly how they kept all that quiet. I can't tell you about how they kept it quiet. I can just tell you they didn't put no tinfoil piece of toaster on them. You can't tell me that piece, can you? So you're wrong about what? About everything. Where's your happy hour? They literally employ a retarded logic called fellatio reasoning. Our ancient history is obviously false. Heck, most of our recent history has been covered over by some sort of propaganda to support the assholes in charge here. How many people know that Henry Ford built thousands of engines for the Nazi war machine, and he got a medal? He got a medal from Hitler. There's a picture of it. They don't advertise that when they run their commercials during the U.S. Open, do they? But then you think, why didn't GM and Chrysler run those commercials during the 50s and the late 40s and the 60s showing what Ford was involved in? That's interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that some other time. The story about World War I starting from Gabrielo Princip shooting Archduke Ferdinand is absurd. The story of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan taking over a landmass 10 times larger than the state of Texas is impossible. Go look at the images of the Mongolian steppe today. It's a few tent villages every 100 miles and a few goats wandering around in between. The land is so inhospitable, there's almost no trees. It's just grassland and rocks, which is called tundra. No living creature wants to live there, let alone use it as a base of operations to take over 1/3 of the entire world. Do you know how horrible and cold a place needs to be where trees won't even grow there? But somehow, these windburned bastards with no resources and light leather armor took over most of Asia. Oh, sure. How did they even organize in the first place? It's a 2-hour ride to the next group of tents, and when you get there, the chieftain is screwing his own llama. The Civil War being primarily fought over slavery is an insult to anyone's intelligence. Less than 0.5% of the South were large slave owners. So let me get this straight. The other 99% of Southern men who are out there on the battlefield, giving their lives, battling the North in these huge battles, they're out there supporting assholes like Don Johnson's character depicted in Django Unchained as Big Daddy. That's what they're out there fighting for in the South, so the South could keep their slaves. That's what most of the northern states are told in school. I've talked to Greg about it, my buddy who lives in South Carolina. They're told something a little bit different south of the Mason-Dixon line. So the history varies actually state to state. Isn't that interesting? You know, watch Cold Mountain. Jude Law's character in Cold Mountain. I turned the volume way up when that scene came. Oh, they're going to be all excited to go fight the Civil War. I listened closely. There wasn't one mention among a lot of them that was all excited about going to defend Big Daddy's right to have slave ownership. Okay, I turned the volume all the way up. They didn't even have slaves up on Cold Mountain anyway. Just Jude Law. Sure, slavery was a factor, but down the list of other things no longer mentioned in school history books. Why did Robert E. Lee keep lining up armies against the North year after year when third graders playing with little green army men would have switched over to guerrilla tactics after about the second battle? Any idiot could see the resolve of the North after the first few months, and it was obvious that traditional exchanges with the North had no chance of winning for the South. Yes, elementary school kids who play with little plastic green figurines would have made better decisions than Lee did. Obviously, these little kids are not smarter than Robert E. Lee. Therefore, there is something not quite right with our history. However, for some reason, large, quote, field battles continued to take place for years in the Civil War, decimating the South. Well, the slaughter was somewhat equal on both sides, but the North had a tiny little advantage over the South, insignificant little things like unlimited men, endless deep pockets, inexhaustible supplies, little factors that really don't mean much in winning a war. The South even had to create their own Southern currency that was worth about as much as 2 grubs under a piece of bark. Any fool knew that the South had a very short period of time to gain the upper hand because they lacked everything one would need to win a war or a long-term engagement. Even little kids playing with their little plastic figurines have heard the term war of attrition. Well, somehow the West Point genius Lee didn't understand that term. Other than that chubby, windswept Temujin bastard, I'd like to point out that all the false history that I've been discussing right here in this section has only been under the heading of the U.S. Civil War. So this sort of revelation that things aren't quite right, this could go on for hundreds and hundreds of pages if we wanted to examine the lies told across all of world history. We're not going to do that here. I did that kind of in the last book. This is mostly about conclusions. It's very simple, though. The history we've been given makes no sense when you apply a degree of common sense to any of it. Therefore, most of our history is false. Well, what would be the purpose of a false history, or let's just say a distorted history, if it's less than 150 years old? Well, to hide something from real people like you and me, of course. History is not an understanding of the soul, though, but think of it as a moat of protection for our adversary. A moat. If the man with the egg sandwich can't understand his own past, can't really trust his own history, he'll never get as far as his own spiritual nature, will he? Don't forget the main point of this section. It seems obvious that ancient civilizations and cultures knew more about true meaning than the modern era. That's a given. Second, the amount of things we don't know about the world and its endless mystery in a way reveals we don't know much about ourselves. Third, what we're supposed to know for sure via delivered to us in the history books, so this is just rock solid fact, we then find out a lot of it is false. It's like it's a triple confusion, mind F. Could ancient man have been worse than today's imbecile in this regard? I don't think so. There is no explanation for the hundreds of megalithic sites around the world that should not have been able to have been built before the diesel engine and before steel cranes. Everybody knows about the pyramids in Egypt, but there are hundreds of other massive structures around the world that should have been impossible to build by, quote, primitives, if the civilization was as the history books tell us about that civilization and what they had available and access to. Now, a similar theme or script plays out all over the world. That's what we're going to look at, similar themes. I certainly don't want to drop this back into the same old duality conversation, light beer from Miller, tastes great, less filling. No, Matt, there are certain websites that'll show you how if you have a piece of board that's so long, you can move 10-ton blocks. Is that the debate you think I want to get into? That's playing right into its hands. I ask us to look at the themes of how reality itself operates. Go back 100,000 feet. I don't care if a certain block could be moved with a board or what somebody's theory is. That is exactly the game that this dark reality wants us playing. I'm only bringing this up so we notice trends and patterns that we can apply to everything else we look at in this book. Not about, Matt, you don't know that you can actually move these blocks. I don't care. That's not the point. What I'm interested in is how could the story of each structure be so similar as it's presented to us in this reality? The story of how things play out. We see that the civilizations regarding or surrounding or associated with these megaliths was supposedly responsible for this massive thing or pyramid or a via cava carved right through the mountain or whatever it may be, or a stone structure in India carved into the stone down into the earth. There are slight variations, of course. It's not all the same pyramid, but the theme is the same. They left no calling card about how it was done, about the society that lived there or built it. What was it built for? We don't know anything about the structure, what it was used for. If somebody's yelling at me now, well, we know the Egyptians built these pyramids, and we generally know the name of the pharaoh that was associated with each pyramid. Oh, wow. Oh, that's so much information. Oh, my God, it's giving me chills. That's really a lot. You know, the pyramid is supposedly associated. That couldn't be faked. Come on, sir. We don't know jack shit about these civilizations. We know nothing about why the civilization disappeared or what the damn thing was for. Heck, it took 100 years to decipher some of their written hieroglyphics, and only then by getting lucky by finding some Rosetta Stone. It seems a little convenient to me, but it's possible. Was it the cuneiform or whatever was next to this, was next to the Pig Latin? It's convenient. What a convenient surprise. Okay, hey, that's not all conspiracy. I'll take that. Rosetta Stone's real, fine. There are hundreds of other megalithic sites around the world other than the pyramids where archaeologists know nothing about why or how the structures were built. It's the repeating themes I'm interested in. That's studying reality itself. I don't give a shit about an individual specific. The same questions arise every time. What happened to the civilization that built it? They all just disappear without a trace. Poof! If the cathedral in Cologne, Germany needed 600 years approximately to build, we must assume that the ancient megalith sites took much longer to erect. To most university Egyptologists, the Great Pyramid is a pharaoh's tomb. That's absurd to me. They don't know that. They'll act confident that they know that, but they don't. They really don't. What they know about it is based on very, very little. Whenever these university eggheads don't know something, in order to keep their $250,000 to $500,000 a year job, they'll toss out every time, "It's a tomb," with as much conviction as they can muster to stay employed. Say, "I don't know what it is. What should we tell them, Harry?" Just tell them the same old thing we always tell them. Tell them it's a tomb, and then sound confident so you don't lose your job. No matter how many thousands of tons the ancient structure is, if you're a professor of archaeology at an Ivy League school, just proclaim it's some poor bastard's tomb, and you can keep getting whacked off in the coat closet during faculty parties. Trust me, there are better theories about what the pyramids and megalith sites really are than what comes from Oxford, Yale, and just saying it's a tomb all the time. But these unapproved theories will never find their way into the mainstream. Only the theories approved by the Ivy League make it to the textbooks written for proletariat. You know why all the knowledge needs to be approved by the Educational Ministry of Information? Because if we better understand Earth's mysteries, we would then move closer to understanding the true nature of this place. And that, in turn, would lead to a better understanding of ourselves. You'll see this theme repeats over and over again. It basically narrows down to 2 sentences. Our adversary can't have that, now can it? A better understanding of ourselves? Absolutely not. It's out to block that. Our adversary offers us these goodies instead of any real knowledge. It offers us fluoride in the water. It offers us no medical cures. And most importantly, it offers us fake meat at McDonald's called McRib, which is probably a mockery of the creation of Adam. We now are starting to see that, quote, understanding of the mysteries is a false carrot that it dangles before us. All of reality needs to be examined as a whole. Step back 200,000 feet. It baits us to conquer and solve each mystery one by one. Matt, these blocks can be moved. See what I mean? When it's likely that all of them collectively assist the reality trick and its general ruse. Please keep this in mind as we continue our examination. Based on how reality should work, hundreds of these structures around the world, like we've talked about many times, should have been impossible to build with ropes, hammers, jackasses, burros, and donkeys. Okay? As we've discussed on YouTube many times, the problems, though, associated with building these things, it's not limited to the discussion of how weight can be moved with wooden poles and donkeys. There are many other factors. I just want to remind you here, many other factors that need to be taken into consideration about whether something can be constructed or not. We've talked about the need for having excess and surplus in an entire society for over 500 years to have the capacity to complete these projects, when simple survival and preparing for war dominated 99% of daily life. It may have taken a family over an hour a day just to get water. The crops were planted by hand with a horse. It took all day long. Where's the time to build a cathedral 800 times larger than an aircraft carrier? Cologne, Germany. It's so large you can't even describe it to someone unless you go see it. Cutting down trees and chopping firewood with an old iron axe would take hours every day. Where did all the free time come from all over the world to build these megastructures that some say could not even be replicated today with massive Caterpillar equipment? If it was just 2 structures around the world, but then if you include the cathedrals and conclude other things like these Via Cavas, not just pyramids, you can get actually close to 1,000 things that should really, it defies logic how it was put there if you want to loosen the definition up. So to me, I'm looking at reality as a whole. But let's go back here. How do these ancient societies centered around staying warm and not starving generate large amounts of excess and surplus that would be needed generation after generation to build these structures? I'm going into the weeds, but I'm trying to pull back from the weeds as quickly as I can. Because even if you dive into the details with a certain lens or a different set of common sense guidelines, it still breaks down. The details break down. It breaks down on both ends, the macro and the micro. So back to building this cathedral at Cologne for 600 years. Hey, little Gunther. Is Gunther a German name? I don't even know. I just made that up. Hey, little Gunther. Come here, little Gunther. What do you want to do when you grow up and you put your big boy lederhosen on, Gunther? I want to spend the next 50 years building the Cathedral of Cologne, Germany, just like my daddy did over the last 50 years and my grandfather before him for their 50 years. And every generation go off and build a Cathedral of Cologne for 50 years. And then Gunther's 4 sisters object and say, oh no, another generation that can't help around the house? Is this the reason why German women have done so well in the Olympics, perhaps? That every single generation of man was out building giant cathedrals and they just learned to do everything themselves, like repair roofs and chop wood and hunt bears, while the men were building a cathedral in the Cologne for 600 years? Again, if there were 2 big pyramids in Egypt and that's all there was in the entire world, it would be one thing. But these are all over the place. They're called impossible to build by many smart people, and they're on almost every continent. When this happens, reality itself needs to be examined, not the specific structure. No matter what you agree with or disagree with here, and I certainly didn't intend this to get into a light beer from Miller debate, less feeling tastes great about they could be built, no, they couldn't be built. Do you understand, one last time, that's not the point here. Do you understand that every time we go into the weeds, you're doing exactly what this thing wants? To conclude, and then we'll back up again, a general point to take away is, once again, what a coincidence, the explanations from authority, the supposed experts of this world, Ivy League, Cambridge, Oxford, they don't make sense. What supposedly the top experts are saying defies all common sense. That's where we need to agree. Even we don't have to agree on all the little specifics of these sites. Okay, the university professors don't know any more than you do. They make guesses with a false conviction so they can date more students. And if what I'm saying is right about reality itself being a conspiracy generation machine, a reality generation machine, a mystery generation machine, it's no different than the archaeologist or the Egyptologist, not much different than the scientist taking their readings from deep space. Well, where are those supposed facts coming from? Is it real or is it coming from a false reality? This is something they'll never put on the table that we do. We don't know if we're right, but at least we put it on the table, and we're open-minded enough to keep this alive as a possibility. All we know is the history we've been given about ancient cultures is wrong. That's what we need to know for now. This is not a book about architecture. It's about understanding the key elements of this reality, which we then use to understand ourselves. As we back up, the amount of things vying for our attention is endless. It's almost like reality itself is a crafted deception in general, like something doesn't want us to know the important stuff about our past and intentionally generates a bunch of noise. This is becoming clearer and clearer. If I had an accurate picture of my past, it would tell me about things that I need to know about myself. It seems like there's too much stuff to research in a lifetime, and all these breadcrumbs are designed to lead us into quicksand, so we never really learn anything important. The person on the correct path stops looking at the details and starts to notice how reality itself is, quote, behaving. It seems that all these topics to research could be part of the same trick. The more you want to hide the needle, the larger the haystack you dump on top of it. The dark side of reality knows this. It's masterful at creating mystery for the general public and conspiracy for us. Matt, that sounds like it's almost customized. This thing is customizing reality in some sort of, like displaying a sentience. Yes, we'll talk about it later. In some way, it is custom to, because reality's a reflection of us. It knows us. It can't exist without us. It's a reflection of us because we help generate it. We'll talk about that later. And to summarize and tie back the main theme of what we've been talking about here, the ancient man versus modern man, or ancient cultures, it may have been much easier for societies of the past to discern what's important in life because the adversary of real people here, we'll name it later, it had less tools to work with as you move back in time. Think about what the internet is today. I mean, think about that. Consider the amount of distractions. It's in the billions that the internet can produce versus whatever this thing could do to distract a man farming a field 250 years ago. The sheer madness we see in reality today is closely aligned, of course, with the introduction of the internet. This correlation, these graphs that fit on top of each other, it's not a coincidence. When the internet came, things really started to get screwed up and in its favor. With this particular book, I vowed to keep the presentation of the conspiracy topics to a minimum. There are people reading and listening, many different levels here, different experience levels. It matters not if you disagreed with me on a few things presented in this chapter. The summary is simple. This is where we all should agree to move forward. The mysteries presented here and what cannot be explained is 1,000 pages longer than what's presented here, maybe 10,000 pages longer. I just touched on a few things here, just a drop in the bucket. Even the last book, 700 and some pages of conspiracy, just a drop in the bucket. Now, the first grade truth researcher looks at each one of these separately and tries to figure it out and jumps into the reality weeds and says, I can get an answer if I just put enough time and effort in. This is the game it wants us playing. This is obvious at this point. The graduate level truth researcher, or the older soul, starts to see the big picture of what, quote, reality is up to. There's no other way to put it. And what its aims are, at least the dark part of reality, what its aims are for humanity as a whole. Thanks for listening. Chapter 3 coming next week. Oh, Free Voice tomorrow will be, after this, we'll figure some mindless horse shit to talk about, stuff we can't talk about on certain platforms, but still, we'll have some fun with it. Thanks.